The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Leslie McGee with the APS Technical Assistance Resource Center. Welcome to today's webinar. The title of the webinar is From Start to Sustainability, How to Have a Successful Grant Project. I will introduce our speakers shortly. Next slide, please. Before we get started, I just want to read this quick disclaimer. The Adult Protective Services Technical Assistance Resource Center, or APS TARC, is a project of the U.S. Administration for Community Living, Administration on Aging, Department of Health and Human Services, and it is administered by the WRMA Incorporated. Contractors' findings, conclusions, and points of view do not necessarily represent the official policy of the federal government. Next slide, please. A quick note about the APS TARC. We're here to help APS programs in any way we can. Just reach out to us. Contact information will be displayed at the end of the webinar. We work to enhance the effectiveness of APS programs by working with partners on use of data and analytics, applying research and evaluation to practice, and encouraging the use of innovative practices and strategies. Next slide, please. The APS TARC works with the National Adult Protective Services Association, or NAPSA, to present monthly peer-to-peer calls. These calls provide a forum for workers, supervisors, and managers and administrators to dialogue and share ideas with each other about the issues and concerns facing APS programs today. The calls are held the second, third, or fourth Wednesday of each month, depending on which peer group you would want to attend. Registration information is sent via the APS listserv each month. Please email us if you are not a listserv member and would like to receive the registration information. Next slide, please. The APS TARC and the Administration for Community Living have compiled resources to support the work of APS professionals during the COVID-19 pandemic. This information, some of which was provided by state and local APS programs, is available on the APS TARC website at this link. Next slide, please. This session is being recorded and will be posted to the web at a later date. We will notify all attendees via email when it has been posted online. You may use your telephone or your computer to connect to audio. Just select the option you prefer on your GoToWebinar control panel. An example is displayed here, and where you can make your selection is circled. Please be aware that participants will not be muted by the presenters for today's webinars. Please mute your phone or your computer mic to ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum and all speakers are able to be heard. Next slide, please. This is intended to be an interactive discussion. However, if you prefer to submit your questions in writing, you may simply type them in the question box. An example of where to type is posted on this slide and circled. You do not have to wait until we pause for questions to submit yours. You may type them at any time, and I will relay them to the speakers when it's time for questions. Handouts from the presentation will be provided after today's event. Next slide, please. Now I would like to introduce today's speakers. Our presenters today are Laura Rath, a Senior Program Officer with the Archstone Foundation, and Mary Twomey, a consultant with the APS TARC. I will now turn this over to Mary and allow them both to tell you a little bit more about themselves. Next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Hi, everyone. It's Mary Twomey. I'm really happy to be here with all of you to be talking about the issue of running a successful grant program, project management, things like that.
Unmuted.
That makes me think that you can't hear me.
Okay, sorry, we had a technical difficulty there, but you guys should be unmuted now, Mary. We can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, because I was telling you some really bad jokes. God, you all missed my bad jokes. All right, I'll start again. I'll start again. So I don't know what you heard, but hey, everybody, this is Mary Twomey, and I'm really happy to be here today. So for those of you who I don't know, though I know many of you, and that's why it's so delightful to have this hour with you, I am a consultant in issues related to elder abuse, abuse of disabled adults, adult protective services, and have the pleasure of working with Andy and Leslie with the APS TARC. Before I was doing that, I was at the Administration for Community Living in the Office of Elder Justice and Adult Protective Services, working with the team there. And before that, I was at the National Center on Elder Abuse. So I have dedicated my career to this issue that I know is so close to all of our hearts. And let me turn it over now to let Laura Rath introduce herself. Laura is, I'll preface all of this to say that I've known Laura for a long time, and Laura is one of my favorite people in the world. Laura.
Well, you are too kind, Mary, and it's just my privilege to be here to speak with all of you today. Hi, I'm Laura Rath, as Mary said, and if Mary Twomey calls with a question, you say yes. So I'm just so glad to be having this conversation with all of you today, and I'll start with a little bit about myself. I was the coordinator of the Orange County Elder Abuse Forensic Center during its initial 3-year startup out here in California, and had the great pleasure of working with Dr. Mosqueda and Dr. Carrie Burnite on that project during its initial implementation. And I handled, I would say, the administrative portion, but also reporting. And then for the past 15 years, I've just had the real distinct privilege and honor of being a program officer with the Archstone Foundation in Long Beach, California. And Archstone is a private grant-making organization dedicated to improving the health and well-being of older Californians and their caregivers. And then I'll add into that for the past 4 years, Archstone was very generous and gracious and supported me in also returning to school to work on my PhD. And my research interests while I was back in school was focused on supporting family caregivers. So again, it's an honor to be here to talk with all of you, although I also told Mary I've seen most of the grant side of my career from the grants administration and program officer side, and less time from the grantee side, but happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Laura. And just a little bit of background, when I first went to ACL to work as a program officer, having been, unlike Laura, having been mostly on the side that all of you are on, which is writing grants to support, innovative programs to serve clients, especially older adults and adults with disabilities, I called Laura and said, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be doing something completely different. What are the things I should know? What are the 3 most important things, or what's the first thing I should do when I'm talking to a new grantee? And she was very helpful to me. And I think where I wanted to start by way of introduction to this whole topic is, project management it's tricky because it's both an art and it's a science. So it requires, hard skills like time management and budgeting, but it also really requires those soft skills like motivating people and building a team and conflict resolution. And, I think there are some people who really focus on we must do everything by the book and have this done on time, and it must be done the way it was exactly how it was written in the grant proposal we submitted. And then there are people who have more of the skills that will never be on time, but their team is going to be super happy. And this is what, this is why I think project management is both an art and a science. It's really a unique combination of all of those skills. And if one of the things I wanted to talk about, I know, is like, if you don't have one of those skills that's necessary for successful project management, is how do you find someone else and build a team where somebody else does. But so basically, like, there's no right way to do project management, but I think there are some basic principles that I know I wish that somebody had told me back when I was writing my first grant and getting money to undertake a project. So you also have a lot of experience. If you're on this call, you already have an ACL grant. You might have had more than one ACL grant. Perhaps you've also had other grants. And of course, you have tons of other project management skills, which is why we wanted today to not be Laura and and myself sort of expounding on in a didactic, pedantic format, but really wanted to have this be a conversation between the two of us, Laura and myself, but really a conversation with all of us, which is why you're not muted. And so we would be grateful for your examples. We would all learn from your examples as we move forward. I mean, I think what's true about Laura and myself is that we have this unique experience of having been both grantees and grantors, but we definitely do not have all the answers.
And
so
Mary, I'll just
one other
and just really echo that. I think in preparing for this, we really did talk through the art and science of it. So there are no necessarily hard answers, but we can certainly share, and will today share some of our experiences and approaches. And just as Mary said, we'd love to hear from all of you as well, because you bring a wealth of experience to this topic too. Thanks, Mary.
Yeah, and just my other random thoughts is, I actually realized this morning that project management probably starts when you write your grant. And we can talk a little bit more about that. But that was just sort of one random thought. And I would love if people don't agree with that. Like, really, no, it has to start when you get the money. That would be something fun to talk about. And then the other thing that I wanted to share that I had thought about, which is every project reflects a vision that you have for your program. So whether it's something that seems pretty basic, like very cut and dry, like we want to update our data management system, or we want to create a new intake tool, even though that specific project or task feels very cut and dry, they are reflective of a vision that you have for your APS program. And I feel like to me, that's really important, because I think the vision sustains us, even as we're like dealing with the difficulties of reporting on this project back to ACL, or doing all the more sciencey parts, or resolving a conflict. The vision, recognizing that this project reflects a vision that you have for your APS program, I think would help me. It would sustain me. So the way we are organizing, next slide, please, today's presentation is this. We have 3 questions. And the first, we have 3 questions. What's the most important thing you think someone should do in getting a new grant? And I'll tell you what the other ones are, but don't change the slides, anybody. What are the signs that grantors look for to know if a project is going well? And what are some things you can do to ensure sustainability after grant funding is done? So that's kind of how we've organized today. And we're going to start with this question 1 in conversation format. I wanted to ask you, Laura, what is the most important thing or things that you think somebody who you've just given a grant to should be doing as they're just first receiving the grant funding?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thanks, Mary. And I love your framing too of, the grant really started when you were writing the application, and with that vision of what change for the agency or change in practice that you were seeking. Of course, congratulations to you all. You now have the grant, and so things are full steam ahead. Of course, the world has changed in really profound ways, probably since you first had that vision of what your project would be. So I would say, just kind of starting at the beginning, for me was always looking back and saying, oh, what did we write now that we got the money? And thinking back to when I was working with the Forensics Center and some of the training grants that came in, but going back really and getting concrete about the activities that were proposed, and looking through to say, what's that scope of work? What are the deliverables that we've promised? And then I think what's important to note too is thinking about any things maybe that have changed or need to change since you got the money, and having that conversation with your program officer or your funder. And I think, now in my time with the foundation, that's something that we certainly, really come to expect, is that it is an ongoing dialogue with our grantees and with the projects that we fund. We do view it as a partnership, and that's a value that we certainly hold dear at the Archstone Foundation, is that the conversation continues from the application through the execution of the project. Mary, do you have some thoughts on the first thing?
I just remember getting grants and having the time from the time you wrote the grant to the time you found out you got the money be a significant enough time that we were like, oh my God, what did we say we would do? Yeah. And recognizing, and this is something that I really think that ACL is very, very good at making it clear to grantees that the purpose of the program officers is not just a monitoring, like, are all the I's dotted and all the T's crossed. It's in the best interest of the government that you succeed. And so the program officer's role is to, really support you, including in that very first moment when you look back and say, why did we put every single thing into this proposal? Every single thing we thought we could do. I remember reviewing a proposal when other people were reviewing a proposal. It was not a proposal, but reviewers saying they put too much into this. Can't do all of this for the money that they've asked for. And going back to the grantee, the successful grantee, and saying, we would like you to maximize your impact, and do fewer things really well and impactful than more things in maybe a more diffuse or diluted way. And so to take a really careful look at what did you say you would do, and make sure that it's all, I totally agree with you, Laura. Make sure that it's something that still works for, that nothing has changed in the environments around you, but also, did you overcommit? And this is the time to negotiate back, to say, this task that we said we would do on page 3, that task isn't as important to us now. We would like to do this other task instead. And obviously this is a negotiation with the government, but I think as long as it's in the mission of what you were proposing and the vision of what you were proposing, there's a lot of flexibility. So yes, what did we say we would do, and what does the funder expect? The next thing, I guess, for me would be something about understanding the timeline. There are times where grants, you get notice of a grant award and the grant year has already started. So that's not uncommon, where the grant year started, September 30th, and you find out about it in November. So your timeline is already 30 days old. 30 days, you're 30 days behind. But putting report dates on your calendar, getting a clear picture of how the timeline needs to be adjusted. I don't know if you have any thoughts about.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely. I think that's really critical, and certainly the first thing I would always do as someone who, in my role as the coordinator, had to keep on top of reporting and making sure that the report deadlines were hit. So that usually meant for me, like inputting all of those report deadlines into my calendar, and then for me thinking about tracking backwards, like who do I need to get information to write that, who do I need to get information from to write the report, and who do I need to send it to sign off on before it is submitted to the funder. So building in time for that as well. And then also I would say certainly at the foundation, though, we hear, all the time, though, we do understand that sometimes, even with all of that planning, that sometimes reports are late for a variety of reasons. And I always just appreciate it when I hear from a grantee prior to the deadline, just to say, hey, we need another week or 2 weeks. And then for us, at least at the foundation side, it's really easy just to put that into our system, but at least I know it's coming. And I'm not sure though if federal government or ACL has a different approach, but I would just certainly emphasize the communication back to your program officer.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, one of our next questions is the signs that a project is going well. It's that there is open communication, that the grantee is telling you we're going to be late. I think that's obviously everyone wants the reports on time, and I do think it is a little bit of a bellwether that a project is going well, that reports are coming in on time. But yeah, having been on the ACL side, it's not a litmus test that is so significant, but letting somebody know that you're aware. I remember, Laura, you having to call me when I was a grantee, an Archstone grantee at the University of California. Everybody's like, you know, your report's a month late. What? Oh my God, you know. And I would be the first to say the project was going swimmingly. The project was awesome. I just had not yet done another thing that I think is one of the first things people should do. I had not put a team around, you know, created the team where somebody else had the job to tell me what you just said. Like I should have created, because that is not a skill set I have. Like things like calendaring, not my hard skills. That's one I have a deficit about. So, you know, what happened over time is we got the great Elaine Chen, who started working with us, and she had all of the, you know, I used to joke that Elaine was the executive functioning part of our office. And so she created the calendar that tickled me. So it said, you know, the report is due in 30 days, 29 days, 28 days, 27 days, whatever.
Well, Mary, I'll say I certainly remember you and the whole project as stars. So I think that's great. Yeah, is finding the right person on your team who does care and whose skin starts to get itchy if they're behind on a report. And, you know, definitely assign that task, you know, to the right person on your team. And I think that's maybe one of the next things that we were thinking about as well, if I can jump in terms of what to do at the beginning. And you've mentioned this too, but that's putting together the right team. Like, who did you say would be involved? But, you know, now is there a gap in your skill set or in that team? And how do you need to round out that skill set for the project management piece, and then also the implementation of the deliverables that you've promised?
And Mary, this is Andy Capehart with the APS TARC. One thing along those lines that I just thought of, and is one thing that I've thought of when I've started grants before, is to make sure you have the right tools in place. And by tools, I mean software or whatever you need. I mean, if you're doing something about data, then, you know, you really want to look at what software you have to run the numbers. I know that I try to get really organized at the beginning of a grant, and there's the whole task list thing in Outlook. Most of us probably use Outlook, where you can plug in, you know, a task that you have to do, and you can set that a year in advance if you want to. So if you go in and put all of those, you know, milestones or all of those tasks or when reports are due, that sort of thing in your task list, which is a good thing to get familiar with at the beginning of a grant. You know, if you do that, say 8 months in the future, you know, your computer is going to tell you what you need to do when it's time for you to do that sort of thing and remind you ahead of time. I think that can be really helpful.
Yeah, that's a great point, Andy. And I know I did look into some project management software, because I mean, when we were at the National Center on Elder Abuse, and before that, the Center of Excellence on Elder Abuse and Neglect, we would have like 5 grants or more going at one time. So you had different report dates, different, you know, deliverables for each project. And definitely, as I looked into it, it was not, I think a task list in Outlook is a great idea, and calendaring ahead, as Laura, you know, suggested too. But yes, there are definitely tools that can help one do this, and you know, everybody needs to find the unique tool that works for them. But related to teamwork, which is its own kind of tool, your team. One of the things that I recognized when I was working with ACL is in many APS programs, the ACL grant was the first grant, from a funder that they were receiving. Obviously, the money that they were getting from the state is a different thing, but this was the first external money. And because of that external money hitting them for the first time, there were relationships that they had never needed to build with, like if there was a state Office of Grants Management or a HHS or Department of Aging Office of Grants Management, the Office of Finance, or IT, depending on your project. And I remember being really surprised, but then not surprised at all, that I would be talking to new grantees and they would be saying, we don't know anybody in grants management, in the Office of Grants Management. We've never had to. So I remember saying to several grantees of mine, I mean, this sounds, I don't know, I hope this doesn't sound sexist, but make cookies and make them. These people are, I mean, when grantees needed to make reports, they couldn't, because there was no relationship, there was no team, these people were not part of the team, they didn't really understand the project. They just knew that you were asking them for this data, and you were like the 11,000th person who had asked them for data that day. And so part of the team building, or part of the tools, is these relationships with other parts of your structure that you may not have had reason to interact with. And I just remember saying to people, figure out who those people are, because they need to be your new best friend.
Mary, this is Andy again. Just one other thing I thought of, building rapport with the people, everybody on the team. I mean, I've been involved with grants where you get letters of support from someone and they're going to participate, but they may not know each other, all those different people. And so kind of getting them all together at one time and making sure they know each other and can just pick up the phone very easily can be really helpful.
And I'll just jump in and, piggyback on that and say that I agree. That's so important. And I definitely went to the Mary Twomey school of, bring a basket of cookies or muffins and bring those around to the other departments. Or for us, it was, because we had weekly team meetings for the forensic center and the multidisciplinary team that we were running. But beyond that too, I definitely remember, I worked for UC Irvine, but my desk, my cubicle was embedded in APS, which was wonderful in terms of building those relationships and just taking time to listen to the APS social workers, what the challenges were in their work. And, I think for us, really thinking about a customer service approach to that team building, like that we were there to help and to help make their jobs easier, help them achieve their goals for the agency. And that's how we really tried to fit in and assist.
And in a way, that kind of leads me to another thought that I had last night, which is identifying barriers. So just like you're reminding yourself, what did we say we would do in this grant proposal? Some sort of fierce moral inventory of who is likely to help us in this, who are the partners, and who is potentially going to be somebody who, either by dint of their role, by dint of their personality, because you're asking for an exception or an exemption from a particular policy. So who is someone who, or something that might create a barrier to your success, and being just really honest, instead of going in thinking this is just going to be a piece of cake. Is there anyone who's going to be a barrier to this? Because I can imagine, Laura, back to the forensic center and building that forensic center where nobody had ever done that before. So you have doctors in the room talking to APS workers, talking to law enforcement, and I'm sure there were lots of discussions about confidentiality and HIPAA, and just if you kind of went in and didn't recognize that could be a barrier, then you're surprised. But if you go in recognizing, like, this this could be a barrier. Here's how we have the answer. We have the answer to this question already about how are we sharing information. We're going to have confidentiality forms that are required to be signed by everyone upon entrance. Everything in the case that's distributed during the meeting will be recollected and shredded. So you've identified the barrier and sort of done whatever you can to work around it ahead of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that certainly was our experience. Like you say, it was the first time many of these agencies were, sitting around the table and really being asked to work together in that way instead of just, handing off pieces to it in a stepwise fashion. And that was, there were folks, I think, who were bought into the vision right away. And then other agencies where the relationship development took longer, but was certainly, worth it. And I do think it comes back to that relationship building and putting the time in at the beginning to understand how, we could best help their agency and, with their casework. So coming in, again, trying to help, but not add to their workload. And then that just reminds me of the data piece as well, if I could jump to that. So as a program officer now at Archstone, we certainly want to hear how it's going and to think about, as Andy was saying, like the tools that you'll need to capture the data. And we like to hear certainly about outputs, but also outcomes of what you're doing. So, a lot of times we'll get progress reports now at the foundation that say like, oh, we had these meetings on these dates, and that's great. And then as a program officer, what I'm always looking for is what happened as a result of those meetings. Was there a change to program or practice that happened as a result? What are those next steps? Kind of what are the concrete outcomes? And sometimes, that's hard to know when you're in it and hard to capture. But I think, over the long-term horizon, that's really what we're interested in on the funders side.
Yeah, and I know that that's more and more on any funder side, something that they're looking for. So many APS workers were trained on fill in the blank. And of course, that day you might ask your workers, what's your feeling about this training? Did it flow at the right pace? Was the speaker knowledgeable? And so that's all good. But can you, when you're conceptualizing the idea of training workers on whatever, let's say dementia, then did you build in that 6 months later you went back to workers and asked them, did you feel more competent working with clients who seem to have cognitive impairment? Do you feel more equipped to do that work? Did you feel like you picked up signs of dementia more easily after the training? So those are just some ideas, like just asking your workers. It's so hard. I mean, the holy grail of APS outcomes is actually how did practice change, or how did the client experience change? And we're still learning how we can do that. And it's it's not beyond the reach of the APS program to do client outcome work, but it is. And I'm certainly not an expert on it at all, so be careful what I say. But I totally agree with you, Laura, and speaking, knowing from my time at ACL that this is the direction that people are moving in. It's not just enough to say that you trained so many workers. What happened as a result of that in the worker's life, in the worker's practice, and then obviously one day we'll have better sense of how it changed, for the client's experience. So I think that sort of moves into, a little bit about, I think one of the other things, and then we can move to the second question, is, just being able to explain to people what your project is. So what is it that you're doing? It's sometimes hard for projects, especially if they have multiple things happening at once, to be able to create an elevator speech. But being able to, for the sake of teamwork, for the sake of talking to other departments, and for the sake of, for staff to understand, especially if things are changing. As a friend of mine said, her husband says to her all the time, change not good for Dave. And I know that there are lots of APS workers who think change is good, and then there's others who are like, change not good for APS. So how, if you're changing something like new intake, new training, new data management system that's requiring workers, how are you communicating that? I saw one of my grantees, I thought just did a fabulous job. Seemed like using several different modalities in communicating what the project was about. They had a newsletter that went out to all staff, and so there were a little corner on the project, a little updating all staff whenever they had all staff meetings. There was a report on this. They convened a sort of stakeholder group of workers from throughout the state who had had the opportunity to give input on the project. Lots of different ways that everybody at all levels was able to see the value of the project, understand the vision of the APS program and how this project fit into that vision. And I think that's something that sometimes gets lost when you have a project, because especially if you think, because if you're focusing just on like the pieces that need to be done, nobody really wants to know all the pieces that you're going to do in this project. What they want to know is, how is this going to make a difference, and that's just me. I want to know that. I want to know, maybe your higher ups need to know, we're going to do these 4 steps, but how do you communicate the vision of this project and how you hope it changes things? I think that can also help with sustainability. But let's go to question 2. So, let's question the next slide. On the next slide, we kind of put some of the things that we just addressed. Revisiting the scope, timeline, outcomes, teamwork, communications, keeping track of progress. And so we just wanted to do that for you so you'd have that. But the next question was really, starting with you, Laura, like signs that are, and also, I know we're talking a lot, and I hope, like Andy, some of you might you're not on mute, so please jump in if you have an example of something that you feel like you've done or a comment. Go ahead.
And sorry, Mary, and this is Andy, your technical guru for the day. I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody now. We had some problems a minute ago. We were trying to unmute everyone, so just a FYI, we are going to unmute you. You will have the ability to mute yourself if you'd like to at any point. And if you're still having trouble or you're wanting to talk, just send me a message and I'll make sure that you're unmuted. So back to you, Mary.
Okay. So your dog is welcome on the call. I used to have a cat that I think in its old age was developing either deafness or dementia or both. And I remember being on some like wildly important call, and the cat is like, is somebody's cat dying? So your animals and others are welcome on the call. So don't be shy.
Definitely.
Before we go to this next slide, please go to the next slide. But before we take up the content of the next slide, did anyone want to comment on sort of do this first, something that you did first that you want to make sure others know about? Also, we didn't say celebrate, because
there's a good way to build
always
rapport,
be looking for opportunities. I'll always be looking for opportunities to celebrate. The fact that you've got a grant is like, woohoo! That should always be acknowledged and celebrated. So, but this next, like from the perspective of a grants officer, Laura, signs that a project is going well. What are you kind of looking out for?
Yeah, thanks, Mary. And I think we sort of have touched now on some of the points that we'll return back to from our first question. But this is, again, that idea of open and honest communication, I think, is first and foremost. So, if a report is late, as Mary said, that's not really necessarily about weather, but if I'm hearing regularly or hearing ahead of if like a report will be late, or hearing ahead of a problem or when a problem or barrier is encountered, that the project has reached out to me to let me know, what they're planning to do to address it, or if it's something, that requires revisiting the scope or the budget, that they're working with us at the foundation to make those changes. And the other part I would say that's really helpful as a program officer is if I'm able to clearly follow along in the reports and map that directly back to the scope of work and the deliverables that were in the grant as it was written. And if there's that congruency, that's always a sign for me as a program officer that things are going well. If I get a report but it's not necessarily on topic or hasn't addressed the key issues of the change or the work that they're trying to do, that's where I'll be following up as a program officer. How about for you, Mary? What do you look for to know that if a project's going well?
Well, both of those things. I remember a grantee who, we would have a regularly scheduled call, and the person just would not call. That state just would not call. And I remember thinking, I don't know, like, what's going on? Does this mean this is bad? They don't like me? Of course, I go to they don't like me first. But they, and I don't think it always means that something's going wrong with the project, but I think it certainly raised alarm bells when there was just not, silence on the other end. I learned later, because of course I called and say, like, what's going on? It turns out this person had to do everything for the grant. When they were subcontracting with a local university, she had to write the contract. Like, she had no support whatsoever. It was everything that the proposal said that the state would do was being done by basically one person. And so sort of going back to teamwork or getting buy-in from support from others, there was just a huge steep learning curve and talking. And I think what happened over time is that I think she began to trust that she could tell me that things were very difficult. And not in a bad way. She wasn't trashing anybody, or she was just making it clear some of the barriers that she was encountering. And I think that some of the early time when a call was missed, a check-in call was missed, was partly because I think she was afraid to say, this is what is going on with us. And again, over time, and I know this, again, part of their job is to, it's in the best interest of the government, who has already invested this money, that you succeed. And so part of that is to be as honest as possible with the program officer about the barriers that the project is encountering, and problem solve with her about how to make it better. I think adjustments are better than hiding the ball and not telling the program officer what's going on. So some of those things about reports not coming in on time, calls not coming in on time, can be just inefficiency or disorganization, but I think some of them are maybe these other barriers. But they are things to certainly things that piqued my interest in that project. And also, I think. Oh, go ahead, please.
Well, I was just going to jump in and really agree with that. We have a project right now. For us, it's in our depression care work, and they, I would say, have really struggled with the enrollment piece. So in tracking the reports, we saw that they weren't really hitting their target numbers in terms of how many clients they would be serving. And that was an opportunity for us to schedule some additional calls with that site, and it's still ongoing. But what we were able to do was help them make some changes to their protocol. Because just as Mary said, same with the foundation money, once we've invested in a program, we want to see it succeed as well. So it's in our best interest, as well as the projects, to see, what's changed, or how do we need to tweak, in this case it's the enrollment protocol, to make sure that they're still meeting the spirit and the vision of the project, just as we've been talking about, but making changes in practice to make it possible.
Yeah, and I think similarly adjustments are expected, and several of the grantees that I worked with had changes in leadership. I remember one state, every single person above the person who was the grants, who was managing the grant for that state, every single person in her line of command above her left, like the month that she got the notice that they had gotten the award. And I mean, of course, that's going to create a huge delay in terms of getting buy-in. I mean, certain things could happen, but other things couldn't happen without buy-in from the leadership, which had not been, had to be put in place. And those are okay. It's really just about communicating back to the program officers. Sometimes too, you would see, like, again, there's a delay between the time you write the proposal and the time you get the money. Maybe something that you said you were going to do in that time, you learn that another state has already done it. You're going to create a great worker safety protocol. I'm making this up. And then you find out, oh, Louisiana did that and they're sharing it and we just need to tweak it. So, we would prefer, the government would probably prefer not to pay you to do something that's already been done and can be, but what else could you do? How do you build on? So what opportunities may have come your way that make you think, oh, this original idea was a good idea and the government liked that idea, but here's actually a better idea to share, and we're going to leverage this other opportunity over here. So again, just this, and going back just briefly to the idea that the project proposal is part of project management, I saw a lot of times where timelines were ridiculously optimistic. Like, we're going to hire someone to run this. We're going to hire somebody. It's in the project money. We expect the money September 1. By October 1, the project timeline says, Susie will be hired. I'm like looking at it going, where do you work that you can get somebody on board in 30 days? So obviously adjustments are going to need to be made because, but maybe the thing to do was to have your proposal actually acknowledge the fact that in our state, it takes 6 months to onboard somebody. Maybe you're afraid the grantee is not going to like that. Grantor, rather, is not going to like that. So maybe you don't say 6 months, but you say 4 months, but don't say 30 days. Because, but anyway, as long as you're honest, back to the funder, I think that that's what I was looking for. Are you forthcoming with information? I would rather have you be forthcoming and make adjustments than find out later that something sort of difficult was going on and I wasn't aware of it.
Mary?
Leslie.
Hello, excuse me.
Oh, go ahead,
Laura and Mary, I just want to check in with you guys. We only have about 10 minutes left, and we still want to get to our third question. And we also have a comment from one of the attendees that I want to share before we wrap up.
Okay. Do you want, Laura, do you want to say what you're going to say and then maybe hear the comment?
Yeah, that's great. I think this will wrap it up, which is on this question, which is just to say, we now expect that there will be personnel changes and timeline changes, and that's sort of built into our understanding of how all projects are going to run. We don't know what the change will be, but we know it's coming.
Yeah. So thank you.
The comment that we received was actually on the first question. It was a first thing to do suggestion, and the recommendation was kickoff meeting with upper management, budget, procurement team to remind all of the project details and confirm the commitment of staff and resources from each to see it through. So that was kind of actually applicable to some of the things you were just talking about.
That's a fabulous idea. Yeah, absolutely great idea.
That's great. Yeah, and we see that sometimes in site visits, and I think that'll bring us really to our next question as well. But as a program officer attending a site visit, sometimes you get a sense too, like, is this the first time everyone's met? How many times have they met before? And then that kickoff meeting, hopefully you can sustain that momentum and, you know, schedule whatever regular meetings with the appropriate people are needed to keep the relationships going and keep the momentum for the project.
So Leslie, let's go to the next slide. Thank you, Laura. Or Andy. Okay, so this is just a little recap of what we said about signs that a project is going well. And then let's go to the next slide. That's just a quick, so yeah, the last thing we wanted to talk about is, you know, some things that projects can do to ensure sustainability after the funding is over. And Laura, do you mind if I just ask you that question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Things that you've seen? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, yeah, for us, and we've said this already as well, which is sustainability really starts just as the project management starts when you're writing the grant. So does sustainability, you know, getting the buy-in from the right people, developing that clear mission and vision for the project, and then thinking about the change that you're seeking to make with the project or the grant, and how you can internalize that into your systems. So, you know, what will change as a result of that project, and how can you, you know, capture that along the way? And that starts, yeah, really with writing the application, and the time to think about sustainability is certainly at the beginning.
Yeah, I feel like sustainability is one of those, like, having written several grants, and we get to that part about how will you sustain the grant, it's a lot of it is just like wishful thinking, like aspiration. We will seek, you know, the things where I've seen it done well, or not done well, where I've seen, especially for APS grantees, I feel like if along the way there has been the buy-in of leadership, and if along the way you've documented the impact of your program, the project, in terms of both outputs and outcomes, in at least 2 grants that I'm aware of, the project got integrated into state budget.
Yeah.
And that, you know, that's a great result of the government investing money to do something, and then the state recognizing the benefits of that project, that you might not have been able to start the project without the ACL's funding, but the state recognizes that that's an outcome that I think is really positive. Another thing, though, is I've also seen where some of the outcomes of the project are just integrated into practice. So, you know, if one of the things we were doing is something that you needed money to get started. So, for example, a project that was training sexual assault workers on working with adults with disabilities or older adults who were victims of sexual abuse. So that sometimes money brings people to the table, even if they're not getting the money, but that everybody's like, oh, you have money to do that? You have a grant to do that? Oh, well, we'll come to your table, even though we're not going to get any of that money, because we kind of get it. We get that we have to do something about that. And you have money now to help us, at least, you know, come to the right room together, to be together. And then, but then afterward, after that money was gone, that the project, the relationships that were built, and the interest in the project and the goals of the project, that still continued, even though the money from ACL was gone. So whether it goes onto a state budget because you actually have hired somebody that needs a salary, or just the goals of the project are recognized as important, and then that work continues. That's a different kind of sustainability. It doesn't require ongoing resources.
And that's the holy grail, I'd say, for foundations too. You know, I think often foundations have some seed money, you know, to try a new idea, a new innovation. And then, you know, what we want to hear, or what we're looking for in reviewing proposals about sustainability, isn't, we'll seek another foundation grant, because we know how hard that is. But that's really what we're looking for, is to see if that money for personnel could be incorporated onto, as Mary said, a state budget or a county budget. And that was certainly the case, which was so great with the medical response team in Orange County, was they were able to build that billing process into the county budget at APS. And another example from our elder abuse work, where it was creating a curriculum for training on elder abuse for a mandated reporter population, and then, you know, having that continue. And that does require, you know, some funds and personnel to update, but making sure that's embedded into the training requirements for those workers.
Mm-hmm. I think that we could have a whole other webinar, and in fact, you may have already done this, Andy and Leslie, with seeking other funds, you know, from VOCA, other sources of federal funds for program. Again, you know, in there was a state that I'm aware of where they got an ACL grant, started a pilot project, and then applied using the outcomes of the ACL funded project they applied for, and got a $2 million VOCA grant. But so there is also that, using if you've documented your outputs and outcomes from the ACL project, if you've you know, if you've figured out a way to tell the story of your project and how your project fits into a vision for your ACL, for your APS program, you know, that includes, you know, real life examples, and then I think going to another source of funding is, or back to ACL, depending on what's going on with other sources of funding, that you have getting one grant. The predictor of getting another grant is that you have one grant. So, you know, to document what your progress is and your outcomes will help you get another grant, if in fact another grant is what's needed. So sorry, Andy, it sounded like you were going to say something.
Oh, that was actually
someone else.
Yeah, it was actually Mrs. Leslie.
Oh, sorry, Leslie.
We have about 2 minutes left, ladies. So can we look at this wrap-up slide for you to summarize this last question and give our attendees one last opportunity to chime in with any questions or comments? I don't want to cut anybody off or prevent anybody's opportunity to speak up.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would just say, Leslie, again, thank you to the TARC for inviting Laura and myself to have this conversation in front of others, like dining with Andre. And also just to go back to sort of what I said at the beginning, it's an art and a science. And the first thing we need to do is just congratulations that you're on this call, that you got an ACL grant. And congratulations also to ACL for having the kind of, creating the kind of framework that allows you to succeed, and that has, you know, gives you caring, intelligent, thoughtful program officers that are really interested in your success, because it's a partnership. Your project's success is a partnership with ACL, and you know, I am really proud of the work that ACL is funding, and really proud of the work that APS programs are doing all over the country. So that's just my thank you.
We have put Laura and Mary's contact information up on the slide for anyone who would like to reach out to them. Again, we will be sending out a copy of the handout to all the attendees after today's event. Can you go to the next slide, please? And this, of course, is the contact information for the APS TARC. And you are also welcome and encouraged to reach out to us if there is anything that we can do, or any questions or resources that we can help you. get to regarding your APS program. I want to thank Mary and Laura again. I think this was extremely informative and helpful today. I appreciate you all's time, and thank everyone else for attending. And we will be in touch with additional grantee support activities. Everybody have a great and wonderful and safe weekend, please.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.